last rays of daylight, which had held such promise through the high glass windows of the library annex, are now receding into a bruised purple wash over the distant harbor. You remain seated at your broad wooden desk, the surface still carrying the faint residue of day's work, dried flakes of lapis pigment, smudged traces of ochre, and the ghost scent of gallnut ink. The light has shifted completely, losing its sharp edge and adopting a soft, diffuse quality that seems to absorb sound itself. It falls across your tools, the carefully arranged trays, the shallow pots holding pigmented liquid, the stack of unused papyrus waiting patiently for tomorrow's morning light. You make no move towards leaving yet, simply pausing in this quiet space where the intense intellectual activity of the day has settled into a profound stillness. The rhythmic clicking and scratching that defined your routine, the scrape of the reed against papyrus, the gentle grindstone turning pigment into powder, has ceased, replaced by something far more subtle, the ambient breathing of the vast building itself. You begin your routine cleanup. First, you attend to the inks. You carefully gather the small ceramic pots, tipping them slightly to allow any remaining liquid to pool in a waiting basin. The ink is a complex substance, much more than just soot mixed with water. It contains tannins and mineral salts, ingredients that bind light and knowledge into physical form. You gently wipe the excess from the stone surfaces with a damp cloth, a methodical action that demands attention to detail, lest you smear the faint yellow patina of dried pigments onto the clean limestone counter beside your station. As you work, you notice the way the absorbed moisture leaves the papyrus scraps slightly tacky, holding the ghosts of forgotten characters within their fibers. It is these remnants, these faded signatures of thought, that ground you in the reality of the day's labor. You turn your attention to the reeds and quills. You select several remaining writing implements, laying them out on a soft piece of linen cloth. The variety is striking. Some are cut from tough feather shafts, others merely treated reeds, shaped for maximum glide and consistent flow. You inspect them, running a thumb over the smooth, polished keratin or the fibrous edge. Each implement tells a story of its preparation, the patient trimming, the careful hardening, the sharpening performed countless times by hands before yours. This simple act of inspecting your tools feels almost ritualistic, acknowledging that nothing is simply used. Everything must be prepared, refined, and honored in its material state. The cleaning process continues with the papyrus itself. You collect the day's scraps, the misfiled drafts, the discarded practice sheets, the test samples for new pigment mixes. These pieces are not mere trash. They represent ideas that were tested, words that stumbled into existence, and thoughts that changed direction before solidifying onto a fresh surface. You stack them methodically, grouping by material used or perhaps by size. The weight of these stacked scraps is surprisingly considerable, a palpable accumulation of human effort, momentary brilliance, and abandoned lines. You contemplate the lifespan of this material, so fragile, yet capable of holding such immense amounts of intellectual density for centuries. Moving away from the immediate desk, You approach the larger vats used for mixing pigments and preparing washes. These basins are washed slowly with cool water drawn from a nearby cistern outlet. The sound of the running water is surprisingly loud in the vast quietness of the annex, a continuous, gentle murmur that seems to wash away the sharper edges of thought and fatigue alike. You scrub the residue from the side walls, observing the minute mineral deposits that cling stubbornly to the ceramic, a blend of blue powder, black carbon, and burnt yellow. Each speck represents hours of concentrated effort, the crushing of minerals, the careful mixing of acidic liquids, the persistent patience required to turn raw earth into permanent pigment. The scents surrounding you shift as you clean. The sharp, slightly bitter tang of dissolved tannins gives way to the cooler, cleaner smell of wet limestone and circulating air. There is a faint undertone now, the marine saltiness carried through the underground tunnels from the nearby harbor, mixed with the deep, sweet musk of oiled wood used in the building's architecture. This combination of scents anchors you firmly in this place, at this time, under this specific Alexandrian sky. Your movement carries you toward the main exit corridor of your working area, a passage that leads out from the controlled environment of the Scribble Annex and back into the wider structure of the library. The architecture itself is a character here. Cool stone walls designed to regulate the oppressive heat of the Egyptian climate, vaulted ceilings that echo the footsteps of passing scholars, and archways built to accommodate both body and immense volumes of stored knowledge. As you walk through these familiar passages, the weight of the day's learning settles on you like a heavy but comfortable cloak. You pause near a column supporting one of the deeper reading rooms. The column is carved with repeating patterns, geometric friezes that draw the eye upward, seemingly suggesting an endless ascent towards pure thought. Running your fingertips lightly over the cool, worn stone, you feel the accumulated history through it. This stone has borne witness to countless scribble days, to scholars who once pondered philosophy under this very roof, to hands stained with different pigments and tasked with vastly differing knowledge. You are merely a current in an immense river of recorded understanding. The contemplation is not one of ambition or success. Rather, it is a sense of deep responsibility for the continuity itself. You have taken fleeting human chatter, the theories of medicine, the genealogies of kings, the poems dedicated to gods, and given them stability. By transcribing them onto papyrus, you are making them resistant to forgetting, giving their ephemeral glow a brittle permanence. This weight, though non-physical, settles in your chest with the reassuring density of finished work. You gather your remaining supplies, a small bundle of reeds bound for tomorrow morning's mixing, and a single slate piece upon which you sketch out a neat inventory list of commissions completed. The simple act of writing those dates and client names anchors the day into tangible records, linking human memory to institutional longevity. You do not linger on the grandeur of the library. Instead, your focus remains intensely centered on the material reality. The smooth glide of reeds against finger bone, the cool liquid ink, the crisp texture of unfurling papyrus. Stepping fully out of the quiet confines of the scribble area and into a more publicly used corridor, you find that the building's last remaining workers are beginning their own winding down. A lone lamp is lit in the distance, its yellow glow struggling against the encroaching night. You move with the practiced silence of someone who knows how to exist without drawing attention, a shadow passing through monumental halls of thought. The smell of oil and papyrus gives way entirely to the mingled aromas of street vendors packing up for the evening, spiced bread, cooled wine lees, and the unmistakable, sharp scent of cooling stone. The rhythm slows completely now. Your shoulders relax into a posture of profound exhaustion mixed with quiet satisfaction. You carry nothing but your tools, a small basket containing brushes and reeds, and the deep, internalized cadence of routine. As you begin your steady walk away from the Great Library, passing by windows where faint lamplight spills onto darkening streets, you are reminded that the cycle will continue. The parchment waits. The ink is ready for its next great purpose. You navigate the transitional spaces between the ordered sanctity of the academic institution and the messy, pulsing life of the city outside. The knowledge remains fixed on its fragile sheets, held safe by your diligent hands, waiting only for the pale touch of dawn to resurrect it. You settle your weight onto the low bench before your drafting station. The morning air, which held the faint tang of sea salt and drying lime from the nearby docks, now carries a sharper, more mineral scent, the accumulated dust of knowledge. Before you lies the array of materials needed for the day's transcription. Small vats containing deep puddles of colored fluid, bundles of freshly prepared papyrus waiting to be stacked, and scattered on a woven mat are your most vital tools. You observe the light entering the annex through the high, narrow windows. It is not yet the harsh glare of noon, but a steady, diffused luminosity that illuminates every particle floating in the still air, making the dust motes dance with an almost visible life. Your first attention falls upon the vats of pigment. Each one holds a distinct color, vermilion ground from local earths, malachite's subtle green, and deep blacks derived from processed soot or gallnuts. These are not mere pigments, they are captured geology, powdered over time into usable pigment. You lean closer, noticing how the liquid slightly coats the bottom of the vessel. The residue tells a story of earlier batches, a deeper orange stain here, a faint brown wash there, the ghost of hands that prepared similar tones before you. The work begins with grinding. This is not an aggressive process. It is meditative. You select 2 small stones and your pestle, positioning them over the basin, filled with the raw materials for ink. Today's primary black will be a mixture designed to approximate the permanence of Egyptian blue mixed with deep iron gall, a durable, dark stain that resists fading even when exposed to the Mediterranean sun. The pigment itself is brittle, granular, and oddly dry beneath your fingers. You begin the rhythmic motion, pressing, circling, grinding. It is slow work, demanding patience not just in movement but in intention. With each turn of the stone, a minuscule amount of effort transforms solid matter into liquid potential. grit catches under your fingernails. It has the smooth, uniform resistance of finely milled earth. You notice how the dust particles settle on your forearms, coating the skin with a barely perceptible layer of chalky residue that will eventually be washed away. This rhythmic physical action becomes a sort of internal timepiece, marking the minutes by the continuity of the grind. You consider the origins of these materials, minerals sourced from distant quarries, plant tannins gathered after patient autumnal foraging, and soot collected from city lamps, all brought together in this quiet corner to perpetuate thought. Next, you address the ink itself. This mixture requires more than simply ground pigment. It demands a vehicle, a bonding agent that will keep the color suspended, yet fluid enough for the sharp reed tip to carry cleanly across the fibrous surface of the papyrus. You mix carefully in a larger bowl, adding small drops of warmed olive oil and a prepared solution of gum arabic. The liquid must achieve an ideal viscosity, thin enough not to pool or bleed into neighboring fibers, but thick enough to cling precisely to the sharp edge of your writing reed as you draw it across the sheet. You dip a clean finger into the mixture, testing the surface tension. It coats the skin with a momentary slickness that evaporates almost instantly, leaving only the faint, earthy scent of wood smoke and old parchment mingled with the clean smell of oils. This act of preparation is fundamentally an act of control. You are mastering materials so that they may serve your intention, the will to record, to preserve. After the ink settles into its deep, perfect ebony hue, you turn your attention back to the reeds. The writing reed, or *calamus*, must be trimmed and prepared with excruciating precision. These pieces of local cane are not merely sharpened, they must be shaped so that their natural resilience is harnessed for drawing a consistent line, a stroke that speaks of years of practiced muscle memory. You take your fine paring tool, treating the reeds like precious, organic instruments. The sound produced by the blade against the cured cane is a high, whispering rasp, an immediate contrast to the muffled thuds of cartwheels echoing from the distant port. You examine the tip of a reed, running your thumb across its sharpened edge. There is a faint roughness there, a subtle imperfection in the curvature that would trip a careful hand. You learn to feel for it, to predict where the line will waver or hesitate. This minute tactile inspection is an early lesson in the fallibility of even perfect tools, forcing you to account for every minor variable. Finally, and perhaps most critically, you examine the stack of papyrus sheets awaiting their use. These are not pristine blanks. They carry subtle signs of the process that created them, the gentle rippling of the fibers, the slight discoloration where water has been absorbed, and the faint, almost geometric weave pattern visible when held up to the light. You run your hands over the stack, feeling the surprising density of dry plant matter. The smell is vegetal, dusty, and faintly medicinal, a unique aroma that defines this entire workspace. You spend several minutes arranging these sheets into tidy, manageable bundles. This physical act of imposing order upon nature's yield, this quiet organizational labor, is preparatory for the intellectual intellectual labor to follow. You realize that before any thought can be recorded, before wisdom can be transferred across time and space, a certain level of material structure must first be established. The sensory details compound slowly. The cold smoothness of the writing bench, wood beneath your forearms, the faint oily residue from handling the ink pot, the sharp, clean scent left by the newly trimmed reeds, and the dry, papery whisper when you shuffle the stacks together. Each object, the pigment jar, the prepared reed, the stacked sheets, demands a level of focused attention that slows your breathing, anchoring you firmly in the rhythm of the present moment. This entire cycle of preparation serves to quiet the mind as much as it services the hand. You are emptying yourself into the tools before you can fill the papyrus with words. The sheer weight of cumulative knowledge, the histories, the medical precepts, the philosophical arguments housed within these materials, is represented by this ordered collection of simple components. It is a beautiful, overwhelming responsibility. The silence in the annex now seems less empty and more deeply full, filled only with potential. Potential ink, potential line, potential thought. You arrange your palette and tools into their customary order. A ritual tableau waiting for the first script to fall across the prepared surface, readying yourself for the steady rhythm of recording civilization. Vast, cool hall of the papyrus preparation annex holds a particular kind of stillness. It is not an empty quiet, but one weighted down by untold words. Sunlight struggles to penetrate the high clerestory windows, arriving in pale, shifting shafts that illuminate motes of dust suspended in the air. You move from your corner workstation toward the large soaking tubs used for preparing the raw fibers. The air here carries a distinct, earthy scent, a blend of damp reeds, mineral salts, and something subtly alkaline, the smell of transformation. Your hands reach into the deep basin where bundles of fresh papyrus bark await their treatment. They feel cool and resilient, retaining the ghost memory of the Nile bank from which they were cut. You lift a stack, examining the outer layers. They are still faintly greenish in places, bearing the marks of the plant's life cycle, a delicate reminder of the organic origin of the intellectual medium. You know that these sheets must be soaked repeatedly, an act of slow chemical preparation before they can even think of holding ink. This soaking process is itself a ritual, preparing matter for meaning. You ladle out small quantities of the papyrus into shallow trays, arranging them with careful geometrical precision on a prepared slatted surface. You observe the natural grain structure, how the fibers run lengthwise, creating subtle variations in thickness and absorption capacity across even what seems like uniform sheets. Each sheet is an individual membrane, a fragile skin waiting to receive the permanence of thought. The papyrus requires both patience and physical strength to prepare properly. It must be flattened, pressed against cool stones, and sometimes lightly treated with sizing agents, natural resins, or mixtures that control how quickly the liquid ink penetrates and settles. You dip your fingertips into a shallow bowl containing a paste made from ground linen fibers mixed with water, The mixture is viscous, but thin, offering a gentle resistance when applied to the topmost surface of the stacks. This action feels less like working and more like conducting a slow meditation upon material possibility. As you work across the stack, smoothing each section, your awareness drifts not merely to the physical sheets beneath your palms, but to the sheer potential contained within them. The blankness is breathtaking in its potentiality. It is an absence that demands filling, a clean canvas stretched taut between 2 points of possibility. Lining up the finished stacks requires judgment. Some papyri are destined for large administrative records requiring structural rigidity, others for delicate philosophical tracts needing the softest surface. You mentally catalog these distinctions, knowing that even in the preparation phase, the purpose dictates the required quality and treatment. The geometry of the stack, neatly squared, precisely measured, is a preliminary act of order, necessary before chaos can be structured into narrative. You pass by shelves stacked high with reams of unused papyrus rolls, some brittle and yellowed with age, others fresh and creamy white. You trace your fingers over the topmost coil, feeling the barely perceptible roughness of the dried surface. The smell here is a dry mingling of plant matter, dust, and residual sizing agents, a scent that speaks purely of storage and latent knowledge. The effort involved in this preparation is exhausting in its slowness. It requires a sustained, steady vigilance, a continuous focus on texture and alignment. You find yourself concentrating not only on the next sheet to flatten, but on the rhythm of your own breathing, synchronizing it with the repetitive sweep of your hand as you press down. The gentle asterisk, thwip, asterisk sound of dry papyrus brushing against other sheets becomes a natural metronome for the quiet corner of the annex. This is the preliminary discipline, creating space. You are not yet writing concepts. You are making room for them to exist materially, allowing intellect a surface upon which to manifest its form. It is a foundational art that demands respect, because without the prepared substrate, the blank sheet, properly sized and stacked, no thought, no matter how revolutionary or profound, could ever leave the mind of man. Sometimes, pausing between stacks, you look up toward the filtered daylight struggling through the high windows. The light seems to recognize the weight of the material beneath your hands. It illuminates every slight imperfection in the fibrous weave, every minute dust speck that must be accounted for. It reminds you that knowledge, much like the papyrus itself, is subject to wear and time, requiring constant maintenance and careful physical handling. The cool stone floor underfoot offers a steady grounding sensation, anchoring you to the present task. You feel the coolness seeping up through your soles, contrasting with the dry warmth of the prepared material. This contrast between deep cold and delicate potential mirrors the tension inherent in the work itself, the eternity of human ideas contained within something so fragile and perishable. Your hands become accustomed to this specific texture, developing a quiet intimacy with the fibrous resistance of the sheets. You learn to anticipate the slight shift in humidity that might cause one stack to warp fractionally, adjusting your technique imperceptibly. This constant responsiveness is not merely craft, it is a form of attunement to matter itself. When you finish setting out the final stacks, each neat, each uniform, each waiting for the careful passage of ink and reed, a profound quiet settles over the immediate area. The silence feels earned, paid for by hours of deliberate, meticulous labor. You have transitioned a raw pile of organic fibers into an orderly repository for thought. This preparatory discipline confirms your role. You are not merely a copier, but an essential facilitator, managing the physical container that allows human intelligence to survive the passage of time and distance. You arrange the stacks against the designated section of workbenches, where they will wait for the reeds to begin their disciplined dance across the surface. The silent readiness of the papyrus seems to breathe a palpable expectation into the cool air, anticipating the weight of scholarly endeavor that will soon fall upon its pristine expanse. The steady scratch of the reed against the prepared papyrus is a sound that becomes the measure of your day. It is not loud, but it possesses a persistence, a dry whisper that seems to fill all other sounds around you, creating a perfect bubble of concentration in the heart of Alexandria's greatest repository of thought. Your focus narrows down until nothing exists outside the immediate dance between reed tip and fibrous surface. You are tracing lines, yes, but those lines carry weights far greater than mere carbon ink. They hold the accumulated wisdom of lifetimes, preserved across generations by hands such as yours. You work on a commissioned scroll today, perhaps an excerpt from the Hippocratic tradition, detailing proper methods for treating fever or setting a fractured bone. The original text rests before you, beautifully inked and densely reasoned. Your task is not invention, but perfect replication. You must absorb the cadence of the master hand, the specific flourish of the terminal punctuation mark, the subtle slant that denotes authority. It demands an intimacy with the material that few modern minds would ever understand. The ink feels cool on the tip of your reed, a comforting, familiar viscous resistance. As you dip it, a careful movement, steady and unhurried, you are measuring not just pigment volume, but the required depth of understanding. The blend of gallnuts and minerals has matured over time, reaching that perfect balance between deep black permanence and smooth fluidity. If the ink is too thin, the line bleeds into the porous surface. If it is too thick, it snags, creating a blotchy imperfection that speaks of carelessness. You guide your hand across the prepared papyrus. Your muscle memory kicks in, guiding the movement with an almost geological slowness. You observe the texture beneath you, the slightly rough, uniform nap of the fibrous material. It is cool to the touch, even under the steady pressure of your work. The faintest scent of dampened plant fiber mixes with the sharp tang of the iron gall ink, a smell that defines this entire existence. This particular blend has been perfected by countless scribes over centuries, becoming the invisible perfume of recorded human thought. When you finish a small paragraph, a unit of sense that was once merely fleeting conversation or academic debate, you pause. You lift your hand, letting the silence rush back in to fill the space where sound had just been. You do not look up immediately. Instead, you simply allow your arm and wrist to rest for a moment, feeling the subtle ache of the focused effort. Your gaze drifts from the fresh ink on the papyrus up to the high ceiling of the annex, noticing the pale light filtering down through the narrow, oiled wooden slats overhead. The dust motes dance visible in that beam, tiny, suspended records of time, passing over all accumulated knowledge. This repetitive motion, dip, steady pass, slight lift, pause, becomes a meditation. It forces your mind into an unwavering linearity. You are translating thought not through abstract understanding, but through physical discipline. Each stroke requires you to mentally trace the original idea. Asterisk this asterisk specific phrase, asterisk this asterisk precise definition of humors must be rendered exactly so. The weight of preserving that subtlety is immense. You reach a section discussing astronomical calculations, requiring numerals and highly structured lists. Here, the rhythm shifts slightly. The lines become more angular, less fluidly narrative. You meticulously form each glyph, the small circle representing earth, the vertical stroke for water, with careful, measured effort. These numbers, these organized signs, are physical anchors holding apart the concepts of time and distance. The scholar who conceived this text likely spent weeks poring over astronomical tables under intense torchlight. You spend moments ensuring that his notation is physically intact on your more fragile substrate. You observe the symmetry required by the work, the careful alignment of columns, the perfect baseline upon which the script must rest. It is an architectural task performed in miniature, with ink and reed. Sometimes, when you are deep in focus, your attention falters for a breath. A distant sound might penetrate the quiet, perhaps the muffled clang of copper against wood from a street thoroughfare beyond the library walls, or the faint cry of a vendor hawking dates and figs. These sounds momentarily pull you out, reminding you that while this sanctuary exists outside the chaotic rhythms of the city, it is still profoundly subject to them. You gently smooth your palm over the fresh ink. The texture is faintly sticky, cool against your skin. You recall how these texts started. Sometimes they were carved into stone tablets for permanence. Other times they were painted onto wooden panels. The papyrus represents a sophisticated evolution, a means of record keeping that sacrifices ultimate physical endurance for unmatched portability and speed of reproduction. It is fragile, yet it carried the entirety of philosophy and practical medicine across continents. The intellectual content you copy is often vast and sweeping discussions on causality or complex recipes for poultices. Yet your interaction with it is fiercely contained, only a narrow line at a time. This contrast, the boundless scope of human thought versus the minute control required by your hand, is what defines the labor. You continue downward through the text, settling into a rhythm that feels less like work and more like sustained breathing. Your breath synchronizes with the cadence of the script. Inhale during the passage between lines, Exhale as you guide the reed across the waiting sheet. There is a meditative quality to this repetition. It is how discipline is maintained, not through grand acts, but through micro adjustments. As the allotted section nears completion, you feel a subtle shift in your concentration. The physical labor, while deeply absorbing, is accumulating its own quiet fatigue. You pause and examine the papyrus sheet that now holds this segment of rediscovered knowledge. It feels strangely beautiful, not for its age or its artistry, but because it represents pure intention made material. Everything was once raw matter, dry reeds, powdered minerals, simple plant fibers, and through your practiced hand, structure and meaning have been imposed upon it. You set the reed down carefully into its stand, creating a minute puddle of spent ink around its tip. You lean back slightly, allowing yourself this brief stretch, feeling the satisfying pull in your shoulders and the deep resonance of quiet exhaustion building in your fingertips. Around you, the corner of the Great Library continues to breathe with scholarly activity. The faint shuffle of sandals on stone, the rustle of heavier, already finished scrolls being bundled up, the occasional low murmur of academic discussion carried from a nearby aisle. The steady hand is not merely skillful, it is responsible. It is entrusted with the silent continuation of civilization itself. You know that, without this tireless, careful act, the turning of ephemeral thought into durable ink, the vast architecture of knowledge would collapse back into whispers and memory, lost before the sun set entirely on Alexandria's great mind. The midday light filtering into the annex is warm, a dense golden liquid that catches the swirling motes of dust above your desk. It does not illuminate so much as it stains everything with a predictable glow. Around you, the rhythm of the intellectual life in Alexandria moves at a stately, contained pace. You are positioned amidst stacks of fibrous sheets and polished wooden trays, the smell of cured papyrus mingling faintly with the sharp, metallic scent of wet ink. It is an atmosphere characterized by negotiation, by counting lines, and by assessing the worth of collected wisdom. You pause your work for a moment, letting the accumulated sounds settle around you. They are not shouts or clattering demands, but the quiet hum of commerce, the soft scrape of sandal leather on packed earth, the murmur of low-voiced bargaining in Greek dialects, the rhythmic tap of an official sandal just beyond your immediate reach. You lift your eyes from the text before you, allowing them to adjust to the shifting interplay of light and shadow cast by the archways. A wealthy merchant approaches first. He is a man whose robes are dyed rich indigo, suggesting trade far beyond the harbor mouth. He carries with him not a philosophical question, but a ledger, a roll of oiled vellum bound with tarnished bronze straps. He does not speak immediately, merely settling opposite your low drafting table and gesturing vaguely toward your stack of freshly prepared, unmarked papyrus. You observe his hands. They are strong, calloused from handling rope and coin pouch rather than from scholarly contemplation. His request is simple, a record of transactions, painstakingly copied into triplicate, one for him, one for the harbor master, and one for posterity. The task is purely administrative, requiring little interpretation, but great endurance in its repetition. The air shifts with the calculation of value. A different kind of cost begins to be weighed than mere time spent grinding pigments. You look at the merchant, then at your tools, the polished cedering stone, the reserve reeds drying by a window pane. Knowledge, you realize again, is quantified here. It is measured in fractions of scrips per column, and that rate dictates the flow of coin. Later, an official from the temple complex arrives. His clothing is simpler, bearing the unmistakable patina of routine ritual. He moves with a disciplined gait. He seeks copies of edicts, legal texts defining boundaries, and duties related to sacred lands. These are not personal records or commercial ledgers. They belong to the collective memory of the state-supported religion. The language shifts suddenly, adopting the precise, weighty cadence of religious law. You find yourself adjusting your focus, shifting from the practical tabulation of silver drachmas to the monumental authority of divine decree. The merchant speaks quietly about volume, tapping a fingernail against a stack of papyrus that seems almost too large for the small workspace. The official discusses precision, insisting on certain archaic spellings and established formatting conventions. Any deviation is viewed not merely as an error, but as a potential misreading of ancient law. You feel the gentle pressure of managing these disparate expectations, the commercial need for speed versus the sacred need for exactitude, the merchant's disposable wealth contrasting with the state official's inherited authority. Each transaction requires you to mentally archive not only the words on the scroll, but also the context of their use and the patron's underlying belief in the document's necessity. The clink of copper coins begins the actual exchange. The merchant counts out a small pile of freshly minted coinage, which lands on your table with a sharp, resonant sound that seems disproportionately loud in the contained space. You trace the required number of lines on your papyrus ledger mentally and calculate the precise fee, a sum predicated entirely on the sheer volume of disciplined writing. You accept the metal, feeling its cool weight against your fingers, contrasting sharply with the dry, fibrous warmth of the rolled parchment awaiting ink. The exchange is clean, silent, profoundly unemotional, a pure transfer of value for replicated understanding. This realization settles deep within you. The physical labor of the scribe sustains not just knowledge itself, but the complex machinery that supports it. The late afternoon brings a different kind of client, a student, perhaps from one of the lesser halls attached to the main library structure. He is younger, his tunic unadorned, and he approaches with an earnestness mixed with crippling uncertainty. He does not know what specific legal text he needs copied. Rather, he seeks notes on the fundamentals, curated summaries of available knowledge that will help him begin his own path toward understanding. This requires a different kind of scribble discipline altogether. You are no longer simply transcribing external wisdom. Now, you must synthesize it. You recommend sections, guide him toward existing materials, and then, at his insistence, Begin copying foundational concepts, the definitions of key terms, the structure of a particular scientific argument. The act shifts from transcription to pedagogy, filtered through your own patient hands. Your steady rhythm now embodies not just the original text's cadence, but the measured pace of learning itself. You feel the weight of that responsibility to simplify complexity without losing meaning, to make the profound accessible enough to survive on a single sheet. The light outside begins its slow, golden decline, deepening the shadows cast by the columns and turning the motes of dust into visible, shimmering constellations. As the last commission concludes and the final payment is received, you find yourself physically tired, but more profoundly mentally weighted. You gather your tools slowly, the smooth, oiled ink pot, the bundle of reserved reeds, the stack of receipts for papyrus sheets sold. You fold the empty ledgers into neat stacks, returning them to their allocated niche. The sense of order is deeply satisfying. You are a custodian not only of words, but of bureaucratic structure, of patronage demands and intellectual economies. As you rise from your low stool, the lingering smells, the mingling scent of oil, mineral pigments, aged linen, and freshly exchanged copper coin seem to cling gently to your tunic. You realize that the library annex is a crossroads of humanity. Here, the sheer potential housed in blank papyrus meets the sharp reality of daily life. You carry away with you not just the residual ache in your shoulders from bending over the desk, but the quiet, deep understanding of how easily knowledge can be both immensely valuable and utterly transactional. The rush of the midday has passed, leaving a deep and restful quiet settling over the vast halls. The light in this corner is different from the main scriptorium. It lacks the direct glare and hustle. It is a cooler, dust-moted luminescence that seems to filter only through layers of accumulated time. You find yourself drawn into the archive annex, an area meant for storage and review rather than creation. Here, the air holds a unique scent, not the sharp mineral tang of fresh ink or the clean papyrus of the desk, but something softer, deeper, the dry musk of centuries, and the subtle, sweet decay of linen that has lived quietly among texts. Your hands, usually so accustomed to the defined glide of the reed on a smooth surface, slow down as you move through the aisles of shelving units. The silence here is physical, heavy with gravity. It presses against your eardrums, broken only by the soft rasp of your sandals against the worn flagstones, and the whispery sound of dry cloth brushing against another pile of neglected scrolls. You approach a tall shelf built of dark, enduring wood that has itself witnessed millennia of human contemplation. Your fingers brush past the edges of bound volumes, feeling the variety of materials, some wrapped in sturdy leather, others simply tied with faded hemp cords, and many more coated in a thick film of time's dust. Each object seems to hold its breath, waiting for your gentle survey. You reach out and lift one item. It is not papyrus. It appears to be cedarwood plank, bound over multiple rolls of treated material, perhaps texts too valuable or delicate to handle carelessly like a single sheet. The weight feels significant, suggesting the density of thought contained within its brittle confines. Running your thumb along the cover, you notice subtle indentations in the wood grain, marks left by hands that handled this knowledge long ago, before your own generation breathed life into these scripts. You pause, letting the cool, stable presence of the object settle over you, considering how much effort must have gone into its very preservation. A monumental undertaking, even before the act of writing itself. Moving deeper into the section devoted to administrative records, you begin cataloging not through speed, but through deep observation. You notice stacks of papyrus that are brittle at the edges, yellowish brown where they were exposed to dry air for too long, and others that have been stained a faint green or ochre from proximity to certain minerals or damp storage conditions. There is a distinct language spoken by these physical texts. You can read where patterns on the paper, like one, reads careful grammar. You examine a small bundle tied with desiccated red thread. The script upon it seems authoritative, perhaps tax rolls or temple inventories. You wonder about the life of the people whose lives were recorded here, the farmers, the merchants, the priests, whose existence was distilled down to columns of elegant, purposeful characters that now lie quiescent in this corner. The sense of scale is overwhelming when you consider the sheer volume surrounding you. This collection represents thousands of minds over untold years. It forces a quiet contemplation of continuity. You are not merely arranging papyrus, you are curating epochs. Each shelf unit suggests an interconnected web of understanding. A medicine described on one scroll might reference a law codified 5 sections over, or an astronomical observation found across the hall in another language entirely. The accumulated knowledge is a vast, undulating ocean, and your current task feels like sifting through sediment to find specific, crucial pearl-like insights. You pull out a cluster of smaller, unbound sheets, found texts that were never meant for a patron's direct commission, but arrived here through the general influx of donations or acquisitions. They are often miscellaneous in nature, recipes alongside fragmented philosophical musings, legal fragments mixed with personal correspondence, and medical observations appended haphazardly to agricultural reports. You begin your preliminary cataloging, making faint marks on an accompanying ledger, a simple act that connects this disparate material into a single point of reference for the future. The work is less about creation and more about asterisk becoming capable asterisk of recollection. You are helping the structure remember its own parts. There is a profound melancholy in handling these found texts. They have traveled great distances, perhaps from neighboring provinces, or even distant lands beyond Alexandria's walls. Each faint smudge of ink, every curled corner, tells a story of separation and eventual rediscovery. You smooth out one particularly fragile sheet that seems to detail the properties of local herbs, its edges frayed like worn silk. You breathe in the smell, a mix of dry dust, faintly metallic notes from the binding materials, and the distant ghost scent of pulverized pigments mixed with animal glue. This unique blend of smells defines the archive, a time capsule sealed by routine neglect. You find yourself repeating this process rhythmically. Approach shelf, lift object, observe decay pattern, estimate content type, record placement necessity. It is meditative work that demands patience and an acceptance of imperfection, because these texts rarely arrive in perfect condition. They often arrive burdened by the passage of time, a resilience achieved only through sheer endurance. The physical act of arranging these manuscripts reinforces your understanding of knowledge itself. Knowledge is not merely the pristine idea held in a scholar's mind. It is this accumulated weight of fragile, perishable matter, the papyrus, fiber against the relentless pull of entropy. Your careful hands are acting as temporary guardians, bridging the chasm between the minds that wrote them and the eyes that will read them centuries hence. The light begins to shift subtly, moving from the cool gray intensity of deep storage toward a slightly warmer, bruised tone. A gentle sense of calm settles over you, deeper than the fatigue of physical labor, approaching something more akin to scholarly resignation. You realize your contribution today is not measured by lines copied into fresh ink, but by the simple act of order, by giving context and placement to that which was previously lost in the sheer enormity of accumulation. To name it, to classify it, to suggest its neighboring texts. This is a quiet form of creation, ensuring that wisdom does not simply dissipate back into the general background hum of history. You gently stack the newly reviewed materials, noting where potential thematic connections exist between unrelated subjects, a legal code, and a treatise on irrigation, for example. These unexpected linkages are what scholars ultimately seek, echoes across disciplinary boundaries. The task concludes with you feeling an acute sense of quiet satisfaction, not from having completed a challenging transcription, but simply from helping the vast, sleeping library settle back into its methodical peace, ready to receive the next slow dawn. The weight of the day's finished scrolls seems to rest lightly on your shoulders, a physical accumulation of others' thoughts and enduring words. As the afternoon light begins its inevitable slant towards evening, the intense concentration that has held you captive at the desk starts to ebb, replaced by a slower, more bodily fatigue. You rise from the stool, stretching out slowly, letting the slight ache in your wrists and neck announce the completion of hours spent leaning over parchment. The air in the Scriptorium, which had been thick with the metallic scent of gall ink and dry papyrus, dust all morning, seems to change texture as you move toward the common area. You are acutely aware of this shift, not just because the light is changing, but because your internal rhythm is beginning to sync back up with the slow, steady metabolism of the community around you. You walk across the polished stone floor. It holds the ambient warmth of the midday sun, even as the shadows lengthen and cool. Your footsteps are soft, accustomed now to traversing these worn paths between work areas. The transition from the intense intellectual focus of your station to the simpler rhythm of shared sustenance is gentle. It requires no abrupt shift in thought, merely a redirection of physical care. You move toward a small communal niche tucked away near the outer courtyard entrance, where several other scribes have begun to gather their belongings. There is a quiet industriousness here, a soft industry that contrasts with the sharp intensity of the writing desk. The sounds are muted, the low grind of mortar against stone as one colleague mixes pigments for a specialized pigment bath, the gentle scrape of linen being smoothed out, the distant cry of a street vendor calling a commodity that hasn't reached your ears yet. The simple preparation of food requires a careful, methodical approach. You observe the ingredients laid out on a low, sturdy wooden bench, a mound of bread still dusted with fine flour, perhaps olives recently rinsed in cool water from an earthenware bowl, and a small pot simmering gently over a charcoal brazier. The smells shift entirely here, away from mineral salts and ink towards yeast, toasted grain, and the sharp, clean brine of good olive oil. These aromas are deeply elemental, speaking only of earth and harvest. You reach for a basin of water, drawn from an unseen source, and your fingers graze against the smooth, cool curve of the earthenware bowl. The slight imperfections in its glaze feel familiar, solid, dependable. The act itself, the preparation of bread or lentils, is deeply unchallenging work. It requires only rhythm and repetition, a necessary counterpoint to the cerebral strain of the day. You might participate by simply arranging cuttings for the communal meal, rinsing handfuls of beans until the water runs surprisingly clear, carefully braiding stalks of herbs that will be added to soup. Each small physical gesture is an anchor, pulling your focus away from the intricate grammar and historical figures contained within the texts, anchoring it instead in the immediate reality of clean hands and sturdy materials. Observing these simple acts allows a profound sense of community quietude to settle over you. You do not need elaborate conversations. Understanding passes between scribes through shared exhaustion, mutual effort, and the unspoken acknowledgement of a day's sustained labor. There is a subtle glance exchanged with an older colleague who has been documenting genealogies for 3 generations, a shared moment that speaks volumes more than any discussion about source material could ever achieve. It says, "We are here." The knowledge endures, supported by this quiet rhythm. The small pot of lentil simmers, the liquid taking on a deep, earthy, tawny color. You feel the heat radiating gently from the brazier. It is a contained warmth, not the blast of fire, but a sustained, comforting glow. As you scoop out portions into shallow bowls, concentrating on keeping the steam and splatters at bay, your thoughts begin to follow the simple trajectory of sustenance. Sustenance for the body allows sustenance for the mind. The intellectual labor is immense, demanding focus that can be draining in ways that mere physical toil does not replicate. It requires a deep internal reserve. There are small technical struggles that emerge naturally in such an environment. Perhaps one scribe's quill has developed a slightly faulty tip, giving an erratic bloom to the ink line even when held with perfect discipline. Or maybe The pigment grinding stone is showing signs of wear, requiring a particularly delicate angle of force to achieve the necessary consistency for lapis lazuli blue. These small frustrations, the slight unevenness in the texture of the papyrus, the insufficient richness of the gall tannin, are not setbacks. They are simply data points about the physical limits of your craft and your environment. They ground you, reminding you that even the pursuit of abstract thought must bow to the laws of friction, moisture, and human fatigue. The shared meal becomes a quiet interval for reflection, not on grand philosophies, but on the sheer endurance of life itself. You notice how the scent of the cooked bread mingles with the faint, dry aroma clinging to your clothes, the signature smell of papyrus dust mixed with oil lamp soot. It is the unique perfume of custodianship. As you eat, savoring the simple density and warmth of the meal, the vast weight of historical understanding seems momentarily lighter. The scholars who drafted these laws, or chroniclers who recorded these histories, lived lives vastly different from yours, some in palaces, some on battlefields, some away by the sea. Yet all their thought ends up here, temporarily resting upon a sheet you have prepared with your steady hand. The rhythm of chewing and drinking water becomes a meditative point. You allow yourself to observe the details, the way the light catches the oily sheen of a drop of spilled olive oil on the stone, the pattern of wear patterns etched into the wooden bench, where countless other elbows and hands have rested over centuries. This deep observation is how time becomes navigable, not through dramatic shifts, but through repeating cycles of scent and texture. You feel the accumulated weight of thousands of scribble hours lifting marginally. The profound quietude of this meal is not merely an absence of noise. It is a collective sigh. It is the understanding that even the greatest intellectual pursuit requires the simplest physical continuity, the shared bowl, the warming bread, the silent agreement to simply show up tomorrow, ready for the delicate dance between reed and fiber. You lift your simple wooden cup, feeling the warmth seep into your palms, grounded in the shared reality of another quiet day successfully passed. The late afternoon light shifts through the high, arched windows of the Scriptorium. It is a different quality than the sharp glare of midday, possessing instead a deeper, dust-moted gold that angles across the work tables and settles upon the stacks of waiting papyrus. You have just completed the final pass on a particularly dense section, one detailing astronomical observations, where every conjunction and celestial measurement required absolute fidelity to the source text. The rhythmic scratch of your reed against the fibrous surface has slowed almost to nothingness, leaving behind only the faint scent of dried gall ink and warm dust. It is in this quiet subsidence of noise that the true weight of your labor settles upon you. You lean back slightly, resting your forearms on the cool wood of the desk, allowing your eyes a moment to adjust to the deepening shadows gathering in the corners. You trace the line of one freshly inscribed column with a fingertip, feeling the slight raised texture where the viscous ink has dried into permanence. This single action forces an immediate consideration. How much of what you have written is merely pigment suspended in binder. It is material substance that attempts to capture something utterly ephemeral, thought itself. You observe the subtle variations in the quality of your own work. Here, a line is slightly thicker than necessary, perhaps due to the angle of the reed or a momentary hesitation in your hand. There, another passage is exquisitely uniform, speaking only of disciplined repetition. These minute discrepancies are not merely aesthetic flaws, they hold an ethical resonance. The concept of fidelity becomes palpable when you consider what has been passed down through this physical sequence of labor. Words that traveled across countless generations, filtered through the meticulous care of hands like yours and those before it. You realize that your commission is not simply a transaction of service. It is an act of guardianship. When transcribing medical texts, for instance, an error in a single character could shift the meaning of dosage or symptom, potentially altering life itself. Your role demands more than mere transcription. It requires active intellectual empathy with the original author. You reach down and gather a few scraps of papyrus that remain from this morning's work. They are discarded pieces, fragments containing drafts, crossed out suggestions, corrected characters. And as you hold them, you notice how much of meaning can be erased or altered by simple ink washes. These fragments whisper of the intellectual struggle inherent in creation, a dialogue between the mind and the material reality it must inhabit. The original source text itself is also never flawless. It bears the marks of its own history, slight staining from moisture exposure centuries ago, minor abrasions along the edges where it was handled by countless scholars. Your task is not to improve or revise what you find, but simply to be a perfect mirror of it. This imperative for exactitude changes your approach to every remaining scrap on the desk. You start noticing patterns in the script itself, the subtle flourishes that denote authorship, the particular spacing used by certain schools of thought when referencing a passage. These details are not peripheral. They are markers of provenance, essential pieces of metadata woven into the very fabric of the writing. It is a quiet recognition that knowledge, once recorded, requires layers of interpretation to be truly understood, and your job is only to maintain those interpretive boundaries with absolute precision. The weightiest moment in your day usually arrives when you are near completion on a challenging piece. You slow your breath, making sure the inhalation and exhalation synchronize perfectly with the steady rhythm required for the script. This rhythmic centering becomes a physical manifestation of your ethical commitment. Before dipping the reed into the dark pool of ink once more, you pause, allowing the metallic scent of the mixture to fill your lungs completely. You are drawing not just from the ink pot, but from the vast reservoir of human academic effort that has flowed through this very room over centuries. There is a profound difference between understanding the content and reproducing it without alteration. Understanding is a generative process. Replication is a devotional one. When you write the words, You are acting as a faithful vessel, ensuring the clarity and purity of the original message are retained entirely for the next reader thousands of years hence. You study the characters, the tiny loops, the precise angles that define grammatical structure, as if they were miniature architectural components supporting an immense edifice of thought. Each stroke must bear the weight of history. As the light continues its gentle decline, transforming the ochre tones into softer shades of blue and gray, you realize this careful process is a form of profound quietude. The intellectual intensity required to maintain such continuous fidelity draws you inward toward a meditative state where your only awareness exists in the point of contact. Reed tip meeting papyrus fiber. Your muscles relax into the pattern of writing, accepting the discipline that repetition imposes. This focused attention on the mechanics of preservation becomes, in itself, an anchoring force against the overwhelming scale of human knowledge amassed here. You gently scrape the dried ink residue from your working surface. The residue is a deep, almost black sludge, smelling faintly of smoke and minerals. It reminds you that even the most ethereal ideas must pass through a physical intermediary, the pigment. You know that this accumulated material will be cataloged, categorized, and stored alongside thousands of other remnants, bound texts waiting for their turn to be copied, and scraps like yours which, though seemingly valueless, are reminders of process. The gradual fading of the daylight forces you into a state of heightened awareness regarding contrast. The deep black ink against the pale, cream-colored papyrus is not just a visual choice. It is a declaration of enduring meaning. This stark pairing suggests that beneath the perishable nature of skin and bone, there exists something fundamentally durable, structured thought. As the afternoon gives way completely to evening, you feel a sense of quiet satisfaction, not from the volume of work completed, but from the unwavering discipline applied at every single point where the reed met the fiber, honoring the pact of perfect transference that defines your life here. The deep, dry light of the afternoon has already retreated, replaced by a luminous blue that seems to seep through the narrow window slits. You do not rush this transition. You allow the coolness of the evening air, a subtle shift from the heat trapped within the stone walls, to settle upon your skin. The sounds of the Great Library's workday are fading. Distant echoes of sandals on polished marble, the muffled tread of feet through side corridors, the occasional clatter of a cart being pulled away. You remain at your main desk, amidst the ordered chaos of prepared papyrus and dried ink pots. The high intensity of creation has subsided, giving way to a gentler, more contemplative state. Your primary task now is one of quiet assessment, of reviewing the tangible record of the day's efforts. The last vestiges of the day's concentrated light begin to soften, draining from the great hall and filtering through the tall, arched windows like watered honey. You feel the shift in the air before you notice it, the abrupt drop in temperature that accompanies true twilight. The focused hum of scholarly labor gives way, not with a rush, but with a gradual, dissipating sigh. the day's accumulated smells, a mix of lamp oil, dried mineral pigment, and slightly acidic papyrus, begin to mingle with the sharper, cleaner scents of cooling stone and the faint tang of salt from the nearby harbor. You methodically gather the materials that have served you so closely for hours: the polished ink pots, the shallow trays holding precious scrap fragments, the bundle of reeds awaiting rest. Each object holds the invisible memory